Citizens Hour is produced with support from NED, the National Endowment for Democracy. And we also thank our listeners joining us and watching us via our partner radios in Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and the Gambia. This is the debate edition of the program broadcast simultaneously on radio and on YouTube at WADR News and Facebook, West Africa Democracy Radio English Service. Now, several coups and military takeovers have hit the sub-region over the last 24 months, raising questions about the capacity of both the African Union, AU, and the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, to promote democracy and peace. To be specific now, there have been nearly 130 successful coups in 36 African countries since 1952, when King Farouk of Egypt became the first African head of state to be deposed. In recent times, we have witnessed 8 coups d'etats in the last 3 years in the continent. Now, for our sub-region here, West Africa, the bloc has been marked since 2020 by 2 coups in Mali, 2 in Burkina Faso, and 1 in Guinea and in Niger, including some unconstitutional amendment by the one we saw last in Togo to establish a parliamentary regime. Well, unfortunately, some of the worries of a return to the era of military-dominated government is actually staring us at the face. Blocs like ECOWAS and AU are known for their principled condemnations and other actions aimed at restoring constitutional order. However, this has been slow in coming. Well, in our conversation, we will take a critical look at the responses by the ECOWAS and the AU to this event in order to determine reasons why both bodies have seemingly failed in this regard and where improvement could be made. Let me bring on board our guests. We have from Abuja, Nigeria, Mr. Kop'ep Dabugat. He is a civil society engagement expert and an international affairs analyst with over a decade experience and involvement in high-level regional and continental multi-stakeholder policy processes in Africa and beyond. Mr. Dabugat, thank you so much for joining us on the program and welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, also joining us from Accra, the capital of Ghana, is a seasoned development practitioner with over 15 years of experience, specializing in strengthening civil society ecosystems in sub-Saharan Africa, passionate about participatory democracy, civil society sustainability, and open civic space with certifications from the World Bank, IFC, and Change the Game Academy and academic credentials from institutions like Obafemi Awolowo University and Harvard Kennedy School. Well, let's welcome Ms. Omolara Balogun, the Head of Policy, Influencing and Advocacy at the West Africa Civil Society Institute, WACSI. Ms. Lara, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. Good morning.
Indeed, I'm really excited to have both of you on the program, well-seasoned experts to talk about this issue. Well, Lara, let me stay with you as we head straight to business. What is your assessment of the reactions of these organizations that we have mentioned? ECOWAS, which is really reeling from the fact that 3 of its members have exited, and of course, in the event of a coup, talking about military coups and how they've been fiddling with constitution changes with what we are seeing in Togo. Your general assessment of these issues.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the program today. I think at this point, we can say that ECOWAS has found itself in a very difficult situation, at a very bad crossroad, I must say. The organization is currently dealing with a twin problem, a problem of insecurity and that of disintegration. And I think it's a huge challenge. This is exactly what the institution has invested 50 years of its existence in building, and seeing it being almost washed off, it's quite challenging. When we look across the region, we realize that some of the challenges and events that led to these 3 countries actually being overtaken by military rule and their exit, the demand to exit from ECOWAS is not far-fetched from across other region.
Mm.
I think for me, in my assessment, between 2015 and 2020 was about the most stable, period in the history of our region. Not to lose the sight of, removing Yahya Jammeh in 2016. But when you look at that period, we had a pretty much stable democratic system across the 15 countries of ECOWAS. But what happened in 2020? This is not because there were no challenges. When you look at the feedbacks from this state and even other states that are under what I would call quasi-democracy, because it doesn't seem to be perfect anywhere. We're hearing stuff like insecurity, corruption, manipulation of constitutions, economic hardship, state capture, where the supposed democratic leaders of these countries have become so powerful and they have the three arms of government under their armpit. So this is quite challenging, and this was a major excuse for this military guys to take over across these three countries. So in that sense, like you mentioned, we are also seeing a very troubling situation in Togo. Togo is not under military rule, but it's not under democracy either. And if we don't look too far, we would look at Cote d'Ivoire, and we don't know what is going on there. So across the region, we can see fear and threat to ECOWAS existence. And I would say, based on your questions, the response has been that of someone or an institution that is quite powerless. ECOWAS over the years have taken the compliance to its rules and regulations, protocols and provisions on what I would say voluntary. You are free to comply or not. It's always been like that, and has adopted a lot of reactionary, approach in its response. Not because, for example, ECOWAS is not aware of what is going on in Togo, but maybe I believe some things have been done on the ground, but citizens are not seeing it. And you see the reaction when it blows off the roof. So general assessment is that the challenges that led to the military takeover across these countries exist in almost all our countries, right? But the management of it, the internal response to it, and the regional and ECOWAS response to it has been, has left many of us quite wondering. And I think that being reactive in situations like this would not yield a different result. And that's exactly what we are saying with regards to how ECOWAS has responded thus far.
Indeed, thank you so much, Ms. Lara, for that opener. And I mean, you have touched some points, setting the ball rolling for some other discussions that will pop up in this course. Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea-Bissau, and Guinea itself. Well, Mr. Dabugat, let me come to you. The ECOWAS Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance, supplementing the Protocol on Conflict Prevention, states that any accession to power must be done through free, fair, and transparent elections, and any unconstitutional change is forbidden, as is any undemocratic way of gaining or maintaining power. But what explains, the acts contrary to these principles, which we've seen of lately?
Thank you very much. Well, I would start by saying that, you see, the ECOWAS Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance is a very beautiful document, which, if we would have gone by its letter, we would be able to entrench democratic principles across the region. However, there are certain challenges that have prevented that from happening. And for me, I think we have been living in a fool's paradise, or so to say, in our own bubble, where we assume that we've had democracies, but unfortunately, we've not had democracies. What we have had, and I would refer to Omolara's observation that between 2015 and 2020, we had what would be termed as the most stable democratic period. I think within that period, we only had, peaceful changes of government, but not democracy. I think we've always had elections, changes of government, but not entrenched democratic systems in the countries.
Okay.
We've had leaders that came to power through elections, but no constitutional rule, no rule of law in the countries. We've had regimes that have taken control of states, but with no democratic norms. And you find out that at the level of the ECOWAS, there is this this notion about having a club of heads of states, or a club of incumbents, so to say, that have entrenched, so dug themselves in, that they will not allow anyone to take any of them out. So I think that is what has happened, particularly in the case of Niger.
Well, Mr. Dabugat, sorry for interjecting. Do you think, like this club that you've talked about, you think this is what makes it very difficult for others to want to respect the ECOWAS protocol as it is?
Yes, I think so far we have not really respected it, because we have seen even the ECOWAS itself not really coming up to provide very strong statements against coups when they happen, for example, or even to respond strongly against, anti-democratic moves that governments and regimes make in states. So we have not really stuck to the letter. That's why I started by saying that this is a very beautiful document that could have given us a very clear template.
Yeah.
However, I also want to add that broadening up the discussion a little bit to look at regional integration in general. You see, with the European Union, for every member state that comes in has to satisfy certain democratic criteria, which ensures automatically that when the state comes on board, it is democratic, and they are very clear principles. But for us in Africa, we have this, our own main criteria is to say, okay, these are African countries, these are West African countries. You see, that is a complication. The second thing, the third thing I wanted to also draw attention to is the fact that for we as African countries, we have not come to the point whereby we have imbibed democracy as a culture in our countries. Yes, we love it. We have adopted it as part of the transitions from colonialism to nationalist rule, but we have not yet domesticated democratic principles, because you find out that I can give you several examples. You find out that if we have a government in place, for example, the deputy is often just there hanging.
If you go ahead.
Yes, exactly. If you go ahead, and even if you are able to sit with the deputy, you hear a lot of complaints, but this is supposed to be joint government, yeah? So that is one. Secondly, you find that the person in government involves his brothers, his children, his family, his community in the governance that is supposed to be, based on his own principles and based on his own understanding of democracy. So I don't think we've had a real serious thought about democracy, and that is why we've not been able to implement this beautiful, document that has served as a guide, even at the African Union level, even at the global level. It is always referred to as an epitome of constitutional enforcement. So from my end, I think we need to have a serious conversation about what we want to see and what we want to do really in ensuring democracy.
Well, let me refer you raise a point talking about the challenges, especially when it comes to the club of heads of states, the cabal or the group of the ruling elite, which makes it very difficult for democracy to thrive. And when it comes to leaving power when they ought to, you mentioned Cote d'Ivoire, for instance. I would like Miss Lara to look at that fact. In Cote d'Ivoire, the election comes up in October. But right now, even the sitting president is not coming out in full to say, I will run, I will not run. And this is very typical of African leaders who have held on to power for a long time. What are we foreseeing in this case? Are we going to see a repeat of what happened in 2010, or he will eventually step down and allow some other people to run?
Well, thank you so much. You see, Cote d'Ivoire is a very special case in its own right. And like you rightly said, they seems to borrow similar patterns, same with Macky Sall. At a point, they wasn't sure whether he was going to run and all of that. For Ouattara, I can't I don't want to sound so sure, but I would not be surprised, just to give them the benefit of doubt, I will not be surprised if he runs for elections, because by the last manipulation of the constitution, pretty much qualified. By his own manipulation, he's already paved, the right road to qualify himself, to run for these elections. But this is what I suspect would happen. If you have been following the development, the former president, Laurent Gbagbo, is, putting his house in
Yes.
order, forming alliances here and there. And if you understand the kind of misfortune that betailed the people that tried to run during the last election. I think the Cote d'Ivoire lost about 2 to 3, prime ministers successively in a very strange, a strange manner. So when you look at the kind of detailings that happened in 2010, and the dynamics that followed it, I would not be surprised if there is a repeat of that situation. I will not be surprised if there's a repeat of that situation. But I think what is important for us as practitioners, as civil society on the ground, is observing these issues, very closely, and raising our voices against the potential antics that could come up, and also calling on ECOWAS to intervene when necessary and not to react when the deed is already done. So I think that's what I can say on Cote d'Ivoire. We are observing the situation more closely. We are seeing how alliances are being built, and of course, as it is very prominent with these leaders, they have the state systems in their hands on the terms, and could be utilized against whoever they wish at any point in time. So how much power and strength and constituents can Laurent Gbagbo build, and now we're watching how much of also consolidation are the other opposition parties, are putting together ahead of the election in 2010. We are equally watching. And how well would Ouattara also present himself to be the most suitable against all odds? We're equally watching on that. But I wouldn't be surprised, like I said, if things repeat itself like what happened in 2010.
Well, indeed, 2025 will be quite interesting in terms of the political scenario. As you've mentioned, Cote d'Ivoire will be going in for its election, same with Guinea-Bissau. But Mr. Dabugat, please just think on this. We're going to talk about Guinea-Bissau. But Mr. Lara, I still want to take you up on Niger. The action that took place in Niger, the coup d'etat that overthrew Mohamed Bazoum. In your thought, do you think ECOWAS acted well, or what do you think ECOWAS should have done in that instance?
Well, I think Niger was a special case, and I think I can decipher why ECOWAS acted that way, even though, in my opinion, it's not the best, because Niger was not the first coup we were seeing. We had seen coup in Guinea, we had seen in Burkina Faso, we had seen in Mali. But what about Niger? What is special in Niger? Niger, among the three IAS country, happens to be the biggest. That's number one, is the biggest of these countries. And the positioning of Niger is one country that cuts across Africa, the Arab world, and Europe, if you like. So its positioning is quite strategic. And of course, I believe that the fact that Niger also houses, is it a U.S. military force now?
Mm.
Has one of its, a biggest bases right there in Niger. And the fact that also Niger at that point, and like every other Sahelian countries, had discovered huge natural, mineral
Yeah.
resources, and was gradually becoming, a location for geopolitics repositioning or competition of some sort. And all this could make anyone to act a bit more irrational. So in the case of ECOWAS, I think ECOWAS actually gave itself out a lot more to say something was going on for Niger that they were.
How do you mean a lot more, giving itself out?
Because the reaction we saw in Niger was completely different from what we saw in Burkina Faso,
Mm.
Mali, or in Guinea. So anyone in its right senses would need to sit back and reflect. What makes Niger different? Bazoum wasn't the only, democratic elected leader that was being butchered up by the military. So
Mm.
was Conde. So was the guy in Burkina Faso. So what about Niger? What is the interest of ECOWAS in Niger? And that is why it's difficult, to give a different narrative when Niger came up recently, I think a couple of weeks ago, to a sort of suspicion that ECOWAS was working with some external forces against its stability and all of that. So, when you act in a way that is irrational, a way that is different from how you have acted in the past, you leave people with no other option but to begin to think, what is special about Niger? What
Mm.
is it for ECOWAS when it comes to Niger? And when you look at some of the threats that came forth at that time, they were quite high. ECOWAS was not only talking about the usual sanctions, economic sanction, travel ban. ECOWAS was talking about actually moving in with its own contingents to
Yeah.
restore Bazoum.
Yeah.
What about Niger? What was special about Niger? So I think all these things actually would get anyone, worried and feel pretty much targeted than others. But I think some of the point I've raised in terms of the positioning of Niger, the bigness of Niger, and of course some of the investment and placement of ECOWAS institutions in Niger could make ECOWAS to act that way. And of course, you cannot rule out the potential for external interest, to have made ECOWAS to also acted that way.
Mm. Well, maybe that has kept ECOWAS where it is now. Well, Mr. Dabugat, let me come to you. I mean, Ms. Lara has raised interesting points also. Talking about Guinea, two Guineas in this context, the Guinea-Conakry and Guinea-Bissau. First of all, let's deal with the Bissau Guinea as it is. Mbalo has been hesitant in coming forth whether he will run also for this election, which they are planning in November, and he will stand down. And on the other hand, he's saying that he fears that his opposition may come into power, and as such, he will want to rerun after announcing last year that he will not run. What do you think is playing out in Guinea-Bissau as we speak, and what will likely happen going into the month for the election?
Thank you very much, Simo. What is happening in Guinea-Bissau is something that has been brewing for quite a long time, since 2022, if I must say. I think in 2022, he dissolved the parliament, first of all, and then again reconstituted the parliament, and then dissolved it again in 2023, I think December or so, and the complication that has left is that it has created a vacuum where one, there is no parliament to be elected first before the presidential election can be conducted. So we don't know what will happen in terms of what the plans are for, parliamentary election before we go to the presidential election. Second complication is the fact that the terms of the electoral commission members have actually expired. So which body is going to conduct, the election for the presidency? Well, in any case, the president has been inconsistent in whether he's going to run or not. First, he says he's not going to run because his wife convinced him. Then he says again that he doesn't want his opposition to take over power, so he's going to run. But well, in any case, I think we are facing, a classical case of anti-democratic, tendency. I would prefer to call it that, because in essence, what President Sissoko is doing now in Guinea is he's running a dictatorship, basically, because there is no parliament, in place to make laws. So he sits down and decides what to do and simply implements it. So for me, I am keen about seeing the plans for the elections, first of all. Yes, there is an election that has been scheduled, but we are yet to see, the stage-by-stage plan of how this election will be conducted. So until we see that, the comments we will make are only speculative.
But do you think the dynamics is different in Guinea itself? Conakry, I mean.
Well, for Guinea, I think for a while they have been in place, even though I have not quite followed what has been happening in Guinea, but for a while there was a transition program. I think it has only just been suspended, or postponed a little bit. So the dynamics are a little bit different with Guinea in that there is a military junta in place that had agreed to transition, but only perhaps for maybe having some cold feet in moving forward. It's basically not the same thing as one government that claims to be democratic, and we are faced with that uncertainty of whether it's going to now come out full blown as a dictator, or is going to find a way to make himself democratic again, so to say. Yes.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Yeah. No, I
You're done. Okay, great. Ms. Lara, let's talk about the actions of the African Union and even ECOWAS against unconstitutional coups and changes in government. Maybe you can just enlighten our listeners and viewers some of the sanctions and what some of the continental laws say about this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think both African Union and ECOWAS are pretty clear. And I dare say, as an ECOWAS citizen, an African citizen, that ECOWAS has one of the best. I don't want to sound a bit too, ECOWAS actually has, or have best normative frameworks on various issues, be it on protocols of movement or that of good governance or that of trade or whatever. You really need to sit down and look at all the texts that we have in this region and compare with its, contemporaries, the SADC, the IGAD, and ECAS. Look at the text. We have beautiful texts, the ECPF, ECOWAS Conflict Prevention Framework, and so on and so forth. We have professionals, we have intelligent people, that have sat down to craft this document. But the problems that we have is that of implementation. When you look at African Union's documents, sometimes I find it challenging to establish any difference with that of ECOWAS. Almost in words, verbatim, almost I say, quote and unquote, right? So in terms of, the regional and continental bodies, they have beautiful text, beautiful policies and actions, procedures. The African Union has the charter, what is it called now? I think the AU Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance of 2007, whilst ECOWAS has, the ECOWAS Protocols on Democracy and Good Governance, a supplementary protocol 2001, right? And these protocols makes it very clear on the positions of the union when it comes to upholding democratic principles and democratic governance, And in this case, ECOWAS, I think, at the start of the articles, if I remember, it talks about expecting all its members to promote democracy, rule of law, good governance, protection of human rights, open civic space, and so on. It stresses the importance of this, and especially the importance of regular, free, fair elections. And this is similar to what AU also has in its own provisions, right? And it's unequivocally condemned any act of unconstitutional changes to government. The AU says that, the ECOWAS protocol says that, right? But the major concern that I have seen, or I have observed in the implementations of this, protocols is, one, they are left to the discretion and flexibility and willingness of the members to oblige to comply, believing they will act right. Right.
So are you saying there's supposed to be some form of a follow-up, some form of action to ensure that they, respect these policies?
When we make rules, don't forget ECOWAS and the African Union, they are more or less voluntary organizations, voluntary union. I mean, we are together, let's work together for economic prosperity, integration, security, development, and all of that. The enforcement procedure is quite weak. And it's one of the major challenges that we are facing, right? When you lead such adherence to people's, and we have different individuals leading these countries from time to time. And you can see that the reactions of these individuals is being termed as reactions of their states when it comes to compliance, right? So the implementation and enforcement of these principles from both institutions needs to be reevaluated. It has to be reexamined. It can't be left, it can't be left to discretions. ECOWAS needs to have a lot more robust enforcement mechanism. You are rather here or you are there, right? Because your positions, your actions as potential impact on the rest of us. We have very porous borders. We have inter-ethnic movement across our borders, back in histories and even up till now. So one ill act on one could actually negatively impact others. So in such situation, we cannot leave, ECOWAS should not leave the implementation and compliance to its rules and regulations to a laissez-faire approach. It has to be, a bit more robust than what we currently have, and make it difficult for people to flout these principles and its provisions, anyhow. The sanctions, not only sanction, the response, ECOWAS as an institution whose rules has been violated needs to be a lot more than it is now. ECOWAS and African Union cannot continue to respond in a very, very simple and,
lackadaisical manner.
you know, the manner when it comes to violation of its rules. If members understand, I mean, we have some history that we can back on at. During the time in 2016 when Yaya Jammeh, haven't ruled for about 24 years and elections was going south, ECOWAS adopted a lot of, diplomatic interventions here and there, mediations, until they went hard on this guy. Nothing changed, right? So what we are saying is we have the beautiful text, we have the rules, we have the regulations, we have, the details within the provisions, but the compliance level is low and the adherence can also be low. ECOWAS would need to heighten its compliance. I mean, how is it called? Needs to heighten, the enforcement. It's very important. Without that, members will continue to take it, take the rules for granted. And happens after that. They know the highest you're going to get is some communique issued, declaring one thing or the other, and advising the parties to look for a more diplomatic means to resolve the issues and a return to constitutional order. And that's it. And thereafter, perhaps one or two mediation interventions, as we have seen in the case of these 3-4 countries that are currently, under military rule. We need much more. So ECOWAS in its entirety needs to re-examine its norms and principles. It needs to be consistent. When we talk about within the provisions of both AU and ECOWAS, they make it very clear that UGC, unconstitutional change of government, won't be accepted. It's unacceptable. But the applications of that piece of provisions has been inconsistent. When Conde changed the constitutions within the provisions, I think we have something that says that no member state should alter its electoral procedure 6 months to elections. Conde did that.
Happening.
Yes, ECOWAS did nothing. Right. and so many of them have flouted that provisions, and ECOWAS did nothing. So what are we trying to say? We need to be consistent. ECOWAS needs to be consistent in applications of its own provisions. You cannot do a selective application, right? It has to be consistent. Members must see that if I go this way, what happens to this person is going to happen to me. When you have seen a sort of, a complacency with applications of rules and regulations, anybody can take you for granted, right? So non-compliance needs to be, more robust. We need to concentrate. ECOWAS needs to concentrate on specific problems. What are the issues that leads to violations of provisions within these protocols, and tackle those issues from the grassroots. These are some of the issues, and similar to same with the African Union. I think the major problem we have with the wave of unconstitutional change of government that we are seeing is, one, inconsistency in applications of the provisions that both institutions have in place, and secondly, weak enforcement, and the fact that these provisions have been left to, the discretion of members to comply. It's continue to be that way. Otherwise, nothing.
Well, very well. Just to point this out, Jammeh actually ruled for 22 years, and this was really marked by widespread abuses, including forced disappearances, like you mentioned. Well, if you're just joining us, this is Citizens Hour, the debate edition, and we are critically looking at the African Union and ECOWAS policy and actions against unconstitutional changes in our government. My guests are still very much here. Well, Mr. Dabugat, let me come to you. Mr. Lara has talked about some of the policies. She has described what these policies are, both AU and ECOWAS, and has even alluded that ECOWAS has the best as it is in terms of this document. Well, with the current trend and the modern times which we are in, I mean, things are really changing. Things are changing from how it was 20 years ago. The population are getting more aware about, their rights. They're getting more aware about, more involved in governance this time around. Don't you think there is a need to, reshake things up a bit, especially review the document and, to align with the modern trends? Mr. Dabugat, this for you.
Yes, thank you very much. In fact, that is something I was planning to chip in at some point.
Okay.
I think it is important that we look at the history of the AU, ECOWAS, and the prevention of coups, prevention of unconstitutional changes of government. Yes, there is that false notion that the AU, the ECOWAS have been very successful, preventing coups or not. In principle, we can say yes, but in reality, aside from some of the points I mentioned earlier, one key thing that has propped up, the African Union as a successful preventer of coups or ECOWAS is the fact that behind the AU, often there has been, external powers that have helped to ensure compliance of countries to some of these principles, And I guess that is the sensitivity that has blown out of proportion with Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, where now the argument has turned into a geopolitical argument, where it has completely turned to become about, chasing out French imperialist interests in their countries, and that conversation is catching steam, not just in these three countries, it's expanding across the continent. So it is important for us to understand that context. Now that there is a challenge on this hold of Western interests over African countries, we are beginning to see, changes. So taking this into consideration and looking at the provisions of the AU Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, or the Supplementary Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance in West Africa, you will see that there is a need to have, a new conversation and a need to look into how to, bring up to date the provisions of these legal documents. Yes, I was just looking at the Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance, and I'm looking at the convergence principles, and I'm asking myself, ordinarily, these convergence principles, to what extent are we entrenching them in realities that subsist on ground in the countries? How are we tying this to the lived realities of our people on the ground in the different countries? How are the convergence principles, for example, let's say separation of powers, how really are these going to be perceived in the reality of our people's consciousness? I think it requires more beyond just saying, okay, these are the principles of democracy. We have to look at the context and see how these principles of reality encounter, the context of our society, and use that now in reviewing these legal documents. And once we're able to do that, I think we can be able to enforce it better. But now, with these documents, we've clearly seen that over the years, we've not been able to implement it because of, so to say, human barriers. Things like the Club of Heads of States that have, that have tried to ensure that their own say, is final in what the regional institutions do, or things like, heads of states or governments or regimes in countries feeling that they are all in all. Therefore, they don't obey the constitution, they don't obey the provisions for the rule of law. So it's reviewing these documents to bring them up to speed requires, a lot of effort. It's not just about sitting down to change the provision, but it's about a conversation that we need to have about, what democracy really means. How do we entrench democracy right down to the grassroots? Not just saying, okay, we have elections from, like in Nigeria, from local government to the state to the federal. We have parliamentary elections at the national, the state, and even at the local government, we have councillors who constitute, rather than focusing on that, let's have a conversation about this content, get experts around the table, pick each of these provisions, the convergence principles, most especially, if we're able to redefine them in a way that touches on our realities, then we can more comfortably review the other documents. I think that is the way out for us to move. Indeed. Because we need to be deliberate about ensuring that our reality meets our aspirations.
Well, I'm sure Ms. Lara agrees with that. Well, let me also add to you, Ms. Lara, what strategies do you think we can add to what Mr. Dabugat has mentioned? What actions to fight against coup d'etat and some of these changes which we are seeing? They seem unstoppable, especially Togo and the little drum playing out in Benin.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think I was just going through the text now, and you see that, like I said earlier, both ECOWAS and the African Union have similar, response mechanism as stated in your text. And I'm going to go over very quickly. Okay. Article 25 of the AU Charter says that in instances of unconstitutional changes in government, it is the duty of African Union to take measures, including suspension of such members from the AU, complete review, and other stuffs. And when you go to the to ECOWAS, it says the same thing. If any member states experiences a coup, such a member is immediately banned from the commission, and sanctions such as economic travel bans are. So these guys across these 4 countries, they know what the consequences would be. They may be young, but they are not babies. So exactly what I spoke about earlier. Our enforcement mechanism needs to change, right? If I know all I'm going to get is to be suspended, all fair and good. And honestly, it's important for me to state here that this is not the first time that we're having sub-region formation in ECOWAS. We have the Manu River Union. It's a situation where countries that fuse, they have certain, similar situations, and they want to and all of that, they come together. So honestly, I'm not against AES per se.
But can we be against it, if I may ask?
We can't be against it because they have a right to form. The coastal states can also come together to say we are coming together on this water body because we are coastal. You have the right? And what have they formed this AES for? For security and aggression against one is against the 3 of us. Yeah. We're gonna work together. They have those rights. But the point is, we ECOWAS as an institution, like Kop'ep mentioned, needs to walk through its own test and not leave it to, the discretions of others who change from time to time. We take Burkina Faso as Burkina Faso. No, the time of Compaoré is different from the time of this guy and the guy before. So these countries are led by different individuals who may have different level of penchant for power. You know what I mean? Yes. If ECOWAS as an institution put its house in order, its text orders, and have a very robust enforcement mechanism, you make demands from your members when it comes to compliance. Any individual that comes in to rule their states, we know I'm following these rules A, B, C, and D, and that is it. It's way beyond me, right? But we can leave it open. The more we leave it open, the more it's going to be trampled upon, like we are seeing. So in addition to that, I think other things that needs to be done is for ECOWAS to also work with various national institutions. For example, like I said, it's not Uhuru anywhere. Nigeria, Liberia, and the right. It's not. but we have the ECOWAS Parliament, ECOWAS Court of Justice, and other organs of the region are doing other amazing work. I see cases, being won that people, ECOWAS citizens have won at the ECOWAS court, and I'm happy. This is way beyond the individual courts and Supreme Courts and all of that, right? So how do we ensure that the ECOWAS institution, ECOWAS is an institution and it's an agency works for an average ECOWAS citizen? This goes beyond an individual president, right? And how do we, or how do ECOWAS, I don't know, well, I'm ECOWAS, we are all ECOWAS anyway, of people. How can ECOWAS support the different institutions in the country? I mean, I know that during elections, ECOWAS provides some technical and financial support to states to run elections, but it's way beyond that, right? How can we have a long-term robust mechanism that provides support to every country to deepen their democratic practices, to uphold the rule of law, to practice good governance, inclusive governance, open civic space, protect human rights, such that when a president gets onto power, you belong to a union that cut you short at some point without necessarily, because here is the issue. We have had conversation around, and I think Togo had always rode on that point that Togo is an independent state. It is an independent, country with its own constitution and cannot be dictated to. Yes, we get it. Nobody forced you to be a part of ECOWAS, right? But this is how this institution will run. How we enforce that? So I think this is where I said that ECOWAS needs to reexamine its norms and principles, its implementation framework, compliance rules, and as well as have what I call, a very robust, compliance system. I think that's really important.
Indeed. Well, Mr. Dabugat, as we round off this conversation, what role do you think the population can play? Or do you think, we were just discussing in the newsroom the other day, and some people say, look, as ECOWAS citizens, and I like the fact that Ms. Lara is saying, we ECOWAS, yes, we ECOWAS, we need to carry placards and move about, and no, ECOWAS need to be restructured and all of that. What role can the population play in this instance?
Well, I think, thank you so much. I think it's a good time to have this kind of conversation because ECOWAS has for a very long time been talking about moving from an ECOWAS of states to an ECOWAS of people.
Yeah.
So it's a good time to get the citizens engaged in that conversation of building an ECOWAS. However, how far the ECOWAS or the governments, the member states have gone in educating their citizens about what ECOWAS is and how they can, come into that conversation is left in doubt. There was a study that was done last year which confirms, the grave reality that ECOWAS citizens, except of course me and you who are at this level, most ECOWAS citizens don't understand what ECOWAS is all about. And in fact, that study was conducted in, I think, Gambia and Burkina Faso. And it revealed that, okay, for Gambia, for example, and even Burkina Faso, around the Coups, for example, it revealed that ordinary citizens, see the ECOWAS more as an occupying force than as a developing force. Because the image of ECOWAS that they saw, during Yahya Jammeh's time, Yahya Jammeh was ousted, and immediately after the coup that happened in Burkina Faso then, was, these military men that came, to just erect barricades in their country. So those kinds of perceptions are what citizens have. But the reality of, saying that ECOWAS is here to entrench democratic principles and how is not in the template for the citizen. The understanding of saying that, ECOWAS has economic development programs of freedom of movement it's not in the template, the thinking of the citizens. So a lot of education needs to be done, for the citizens to be able to pick up steam. And ECOWAS needs to define entry points for the citizens to contribute, to the entire conversation about ECOWAS. And more importantly, how this can be achieved is that there is an outcry for reform of the ECOWAS. I think the ECOWAS needs to listen to that. I think the heads of state needs to give way for that kind of a reform to happen, because it is in these reforms that all these, entry points for different segments of the society can come in, which will help ECOWAS to achieve, that ECOWAS of the people. And lastly, I wanted to add that I think specifically in relation to, the democratic backsliding trend, across the region, I think it's a global thing, really. It's not really for West Africa alone. West Africa may just be the epicenter of this, development. And I think once again, ECOWAS is on the, is in an opportune situation to make, to lead, I would say, to lead the world in addressing these kinds of things. I think ECOWAS can start that conversation by having two major pointers, by having the conversation in two categories. First is the conversation about preventing unconstitutional changes of government. And second, the conversation about preventing or responding adequately to other forms of violations to the Constitution, which is what happened in Guinea-Bissau, or the rule of law, which we have seen blatantly being happening across, different countries, whether under democratic rule or not. So these conversations have to be had in those two categories, And once that conversation is not held, we will just be focusing on coups, on unconstitutional changes of government. And we'll forget that even within countries, there are unconstitutional changes in government, not of government, government. So I think that's my take.
Well, Ms. Lara, do you have anything to add to this, the involvement of the population as we close this conversation?
Yeah, I think maybe I have one or 2 points in addition to enforcement and compliance. ECOWAS has a lot of work to do in rebuilding confidence and trust with people, with its citizens, not with heads of state. And as the region continue to push into that ECOWAS of people, because we are not there. I mean, it's amazing to see that ECOWAS just realized a couple of years ago the need to move from ECOWAS head of states to ECOWAS of people. And as at today, we are still trying to activate the people organ of the ECOWAS, which is ECOSOC. We started the conversation and the processes, I think, last year. And as of date, is still, is work in progress. That is the ECOSOC, the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council. ECOWAS needs to, rebuild trust. It needs to build confidence. It needs to bridge the gap between itself as a regional entity and the people. And how can ECOWAS do that? It is important for ECOWAS to connect either through ECOSOC or through the different civil society groups across the region, the regional organizations, strong national organizations that have, grassroots connections with their people to engage. There needs to be constant engagement. There needs to be conversation around, what ECOWAS is to the people and what the people is to ECOWAS. The ECOWAS of people mantra and principle needs to be out there.
Yeah.
Because I think, like Kop'ep said, what ECOWAS means to Liberia is probably ECOMOG. What it means to Zambia is helping us to remove Jammeh. What it means to others is issuing of communiques and all of that. ECOWAS means much more than that, and it needs to present itself in a better light. The role of the people are the anchor of democracy. Without the people, there's no democracy. The simplest definition of democracy says it's government of the people, for the people, by the people. You cannot promote or, strengthen democracy without the involvement of the people. Because what democracy means to me may be different from another person on the Bamako or on the street of Monrovia. To someone else, it's just to eat. To another person, is to go out and come back without getting hurt. So, the issues of insecurity, ECOWAS needs to deal with that. Economic hardship, we are talking about the African free trade. We are talking about the ECOWAS trade, free movement of persons and goods. All these bits contribute to the living standards of regional citizens. ECOWAS needs to focus on that security of lives and properties, free movement of persons and goods, intercountry trades or regional trade, integrations, movement. These are diverse of issues that ECOWAS needs to focus on to, increase the quality, improve the quality of our democracy by and large. It's also important, for ECOWAS to ensure that the focus on the heads of states is completely, eroded, if you ask me. Yeah. And I think in other forum where we have spoken is that the people, the community citizens, they see more of ECOWAS institution, which is the secretariat, as ECOWAS and not the head of state. And when you engage the secretariat, you realize that the secretariat and the individual therein, they are as powerless as you and I, because the power, the decision rests with the heads of state. So, bridging, educating people on that, communicating, rebuilding trust, and ensuring that the people are prioritized. I think it's one of the ways in which the people can participate. And for us as people's spokesperson, civil society, and I dare say other citizens, we need to continue speaking, talking, raising issues that violate our rights, where we think ECOWAS has gone wrong, where we think ECOWAS could do better, giving ideas, engaging with the characters, the individuals within ECOWAS secretariat. And of course, when we have access directly to the leaders, be it at the country level or at the regional level, or when we engage them at international platforms like the African Union or the United Nations, we tell them the truth that we did not have the chance to tell them at home. I think sometimes we get it easier when we meet them outside and we tell them things they would either do not listen to, at the national front. So I think talking about it, it's important. And of course, also holding ourselves in that level, to that level of accountability and responsibility, I think it's key. It's key in ensuring that ECOWAS indeed delivered on its mandate.
Indeed. Well, I guess I've been Miss Omolara Balogun, the Head of Policy Influencing and Advocacy at the West Africa Civil Society Institute, WACSI, and Mr. Kop'ep Dabugat, a civil society engagement expert and international affairs analyst. Gentlemen and lady, thank you so much for your time and making justice to this subject matter. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much for having
me. Thank you
Indeed.
so much.
And to you listening and watching on YouTube, Facebook, thank you so much for being a part of the program. This has been brought to you with support of the National Endowment for Democracy, NED. And many thanks to our listeners via our partner radios in Nigeria, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, and the Gambia. Well, you can find these broadcasts on our website, wadr.org, and all of our streaming platforms. We would love to hear from you. Don't forget to send us an email to wadr@wadr.org. Do join us next week for another edition. I am Imo Edet. Bye for now.